No questions? Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to do a couple of things today. We're going to talk a little bit more about, first, we're going to talk about like the constructor and putting in like required and default values and things like that. Okay. And then we're going to examine some uses of methods because we didn't really talk a whole lot about methods. Last time we defined classes and we gave them attributes and we gave them a constructor and a string method, but we didn't really do much with additional methods. So we're going to do a little bit with that. Okay, so let me go back over here. All right. So let's see. I am going to create a new file called loan. Okay. Does anybody here know there's 3 pieces of information that you need when you are going to take out a loan for something? Like suppose you want to buy a car or a house, okay? There are 3 pieces of information, okay? One is the principal, which is the amount you want to borrow, okay? So if I want to buy a $25,000 car and I don't have any money, then I need to borrow all $25,000, okay? So that's called the principal, $25,000 principal, okay? I'll just make some notes here. Loan, okay? Principal is the amount you want to borrow, okay? All right. Now, when you take out a loan and you borrow money, what do they usually charge you?
Interest.
Interest. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So interest is basically the amount extra you have to pay. And that's usually expressed as a percentage, 3.5% per year or something like that. And it's usually compounded monthly or something like that. Like for a car, a house, when you pay interest on it, the interest is usually assessed monthly. So whatever your remaining balance is, they take that interest rate, 3.5%, they divide it by 12 since there's 12 months in a year. And then they multiply that by your principal and then they add that on. So you actually owe extra money. Okay. All right. And then what's the last thing besides principal and interest that you need to know for a loan? Does anyone know?
How much you put? How much you put down?
Okay. Well, the down payment doesn't really matter for okay, somebody says rate. No, rate is interest. That's the same thing. The monthly payment is actually something that's calculated. So the last thing is actually the length of the loan. Okay? So in other words, if I pay or if I borrow $25,000 at 3.5% interest, but I only have 1 year to pay it back, then my monthly payment is going to be a lot higher than if I have 100 years to pay it back. Okay, does that make sense? So, the 3 things that you need to know about in a loan are the amount you want to borrow, the amount which is the principal, the interest, which is how much they're going to charge you, basically how much extra you're going to pay for the privilege of borrowing that money, and then the length is how much time you have to actually pay back the loan. Okay. So for cars, it's usually anywhere from like 3 years to like 7 or 8 years for a car loan. And then for houses, it's common to have like a 15-year loan or a 30-year loan. Okay. In some Asian countries, they actually have 150 and 100-year loans. Okay. Because the price of real estate is so high. Okay. So and this is usually length is usually for things like houses and cars. It's usually in terms of, total number of months or total number of years. Okay. All right. So we are going to create a class, a loan class where you can specify a principal, interest, and length, and it will actually tell you what your monthly payment is based on those 3 things. Okay. There's a big, long, complicated math formula that goes into computing that. I'm not you don't it's not important. The point is to demonstrate like what these some of these class methods can do. Okay. All right. So if I was going to just create a loan class to store these 3 things, what would I initially start with? Yell it out when you know it.
The class statement.
Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna just do class loan. All right, what comes next? I can tell you guys are either shy or you haven't been practicing.
The define. The
Yeah.
defining.
Okay, you need to be practicing. So it should be def underscore underscore init underscore underscore parentheses self. Okay. Now, what comes after that?
All the other variables.
Yep. Okay. The variables that I want to be able to pass in when I create my loan. Okay. So we'll just do P, I, and Y to keep it simple. Okay. All right. Now, what do I put here inside my constructor?
You do self dot p equal p and
Okay,
self.
I'll do principal.
Oh yeah. P.
Yep.
And
Okay.
then self dot interest to equal I. And then self dot length to equal Y. Years.
Years.
Wait, yeah, Y.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect. All right, that's an excellent constructor. Okay, now if I want to make a string method, how would I do that?
You would do def underscore underscore str
Yep.
underscore underscore
Yep.
parentheses self.
Absolutely.
Parentheses.
Colon. Yep. Perfect. Okay, great. Now, what goes in here? Somebody says variable. Somebody says temp. Okay,
It could be any variable per se.
Okay.
Equal.
Yep. So I could basically put whatever I want in here. I'll just use A this time. Okay. So I'm going to set this equal to some kind of a string, because remember, we want this function to return a string representation of our loan. Okay. So we'll do it like this. We'll say principal colon plus P plus interest colon plus I plus years colon plus Y. Okay. Is that right?
No, you gotta return it.
Okay. So I have to go return A like that.
Correct.
Okay. Is that right? I need to learn how to use the, okay. Somebody says yes. Okay. No, this is actually not right. Okay. This is completely incorrect. And here's why. Okay. You'll notice that in my string method, the only variables that I have access to is self. Okay. And that's by design. So instead of using P, what should I be using?
Oh, self.p.
Yeah, I should be using self.principal. Okay. And over here. So remember, inside your string method, all the things that you refer to should be a self dot something. Okay. And in fact, in all of the different methods that we create, for the most part, if you want to access these instance variables or attributes, principal, then you're going to want to refer to them in this way. Because if you try and do it the other way, you're going to get all kinds of errors. Okay. So this should be self.interest. Okay. And this should be self.years. Okay. All right. So again, if you practice, if you get on your idle and practice creating these string functions, you'll get familiar with, oh yeah, I have to put in the self dot. Otherwise, when I try and run it and print it, I get all kinds of errors. Okay. It yells at me. Okay. All right. So now we have a good looking string function. Okay. So now suppose that I was to say, you know what? I would like to not require the user to pass in an interest rate or a number of years, or I'd like to default it to some value. Okay. Does anybody know how to do that? Do you remember that from 109? Okay. So somebody says not yet. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do a couple of things here. All right. So I am going to save this. All right. And I am going to try and first I'm going to do L1 equals loan. All right. And I'm going to just do this the normal way. So we'll do 200,000 and we'll do 3.5%, and we'll do 30 years. Okay. Maybe this is a home loan. Okay. Do we expect this will work? Like, is this going to give me any kinds of problems by doing what I've just done? Okay, well, I guess either nobody knows or nobody cares. But yeah, there's no reason why this should not work. Now, it's obviously not going to do anything interesting. It's not going to compute any payment yet because we haven't done anything. Okay. Somebody says you have to print it. Okay, I can print it. All right. And it should print out principal, interest in years. Okay. But it hasn't actually done anything in terms of like, it hasn't computed a payment or anything. Right. Okay, what would happen if I did this? L2 equals loan. And in this case, I'm just going to pass in 200,000 and nothing else. Okay. Do we expect that this will work?
Yes.
Okay. You say yes. Why do you think that'll work?
Will it just default the others to like 0?
Okay. Well, let's see. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and save this. Okay. I'm going to bring up another window and I'm going to say Python loan.py. Oops, I need to do Python 3. Okay. All right. Well, it failed. We got some kind of problem. It says type error. Can only concatenate string, not int to string. So what's the problem? What does this error mean? Does anybody know?
It means that there's an integer that it's trying to turn into a string to print out.
Yeah. Okay. So we forgot to take that into account. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to go in here and all of these numbers, because these are numbers, we need to wrap in strus. Okay. We'll do that for all of these because we know these are all numbers. Okay. All right. So now that we have that, let's see what happens. Okay. So it went and did the first one just fine. Give us the principal, 200,000, interest 3.5 years, 30. But then we get this type error init missing 2 required positional arguments, I and Y. Okay. Do you see that? So in other words, yeah, it looks like it's demanding that I put in something. All right. So watch this. Here's a little trick that you can do. Okay. I can go in here and I can say I equals 0.0 and Y equals 0. Okay. You see that? So up here in the method signature, I actually just put in this equals 0.0 and Y equals 0. Okay. And now, if I run this, look at that. Okay. So do you see what I just did there? All right. So I was able to give default values in here like this. Now I could set these default values to anything. I could say, you know what? By default, the interest rate is 3.5%. And by default, the number of years is 30. Okay. So if I did that, then you see how the interest is 3.5 and 30. Maybe I should use different numbers because, so we'll make the default interest really, really high. If you don't specify when you're paying 12% and you're doing it for 50 years. Okay. And so there we go. All right. So, all right. So does everybody understand that?
So if you do that, you can still declare it, but if they don't declare anything, it defaults to that?
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay.
So in the first example, I actually passed in a value 3.5 and 30. So when I ran it, it got set here to 3.5 and 30. In the second example, because I didn't pass in anything for the interest rate or the years, it said, oh, okay, I'm just going to use these default values that are listed here. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so now let's actually create a method that computes the payment. Okay, so I'm gonna create a method called compute payment. All right, and for any of these methods, you're always going to want to pass in self. Why do I want to have self pass to this compute payment method? Does anybody know?
Could you repeat that again?
Okay, so I'm going to create a method here in my loan class called compute payment, and I want to pass this self argument to this method. My question is, why do I want to include self here in this method?
Because self is connected to principles.
Yeah, self is connected to all these variables right here. Okay, principal, interest, and years. They're all inside of self. So I need this in order to be able to access these class variables. Okay. Oh, it looks like I missed a question here in the chat. What does this say? Are we talking about local and global variables, or is that different? That's different. Okay. We're not really talking about variable scope here at this point. Okay. All right. So but I mean, in terms of variables, self is kind of used throughout this entire class. It's not a global variable per se, because you can't use it outside the class, but self is an important variable in object-oriented programming because it's what allows you to use all of these instance variables all throughout your class. Okay. All right. So again, I don't want you to get too caught up in the details of this math formula because it's kind of crazy. Okay. But let's see. So I need to import math. Okay. And the formula looks something like this. I'm going to do temp is equal to math.pal, and then it's 1 plus self.interest divided by 1200, comma, self.years times 12. Okay, and then temp is equal to principal times temp times, oops, I need to do self.principal. Okay, but it's temp times self.interest divided by 1200, all divided by temp minus 1. Okay, so that again, don't worry about that. This is the formula where given a amount, a principal and interest in years, you plug it into this formula and it tells you what the monthly payment is. Okay, so we will then second temp missing a P. Thank you. Self.rinciple. Okay, and so we will return temp. Okay, so now what I should be able to do, okay, is let me get rid of this second one. So for this first example, 200,000, 3.5, and 30, okay, I should be able to do L1.compute payment like this, okay, and then I should be able to do payment equals, I should be able to do print string payment. Okay, so do you see what I've done? So compute payment is actually going to just return whatever the actual payment is. Okay, it's going to set it into this variable, and then I'm just printing it out. So let's see if I did this right. Let's see if it works. Okay, so if I do this, okay, so for a loan of $200,000 with an interest rate of 3.5% per year and 30 years, the monthly payment is $898.09 roughly. Okay, we could do some formatting to clean that up a little bit and make it look a little better, but it looks like that generally checks out. Okay, you can go online and look for a loan calculator and see whether or not my math is correct. Okay, but that's not really the point of this. Okay, so do you guys see how I was able to use, now likewise, actually, let's do another example here really quick. So we'll do a second loan. All right. Does anybody in here have a loan you'd like to share the details of? Yes. Okay. How much is the principal on your loan, Mohammed?
I have a question. What's the principal?
The amount you're borrowing. Okay, you say it's been 2 years. Okay, so you borrowed $10,000. Okay, do you know what the interest rate is?
2.1.
2.1%. Okay, and what was the length of the loan when you got it?
The actual cost of it?
No, when you signed up for your loan, there's a length that's specified for how long you have to pay it back. 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is.
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So 4 years. All right. So then we'll do payment equals L2 dot compute payment. Okay, and then we'll do print string payment. Okay, so now let's see. So in other words, for a loan of $10,000 at 2.1% per year and 4 years, you should be paying approximately $217.39 per month. Okay, does that sound about right? Cool. All right. Yeah, so there we go. All right. Now, can you think of any way we might improve this program? Okay, it's a little bit clunky in that I can call this loan thing, and then I have to explicitly call this compute payment method and set it into this variable and then print all. Is there a way that I can avoid doing all that? What would be a way I could improve this method so that it's not that I'm not explicitly computing payments and doing all that kind of stuff? Can you think of a way that I could? In other words, let me rephrase the question differently. Instead of having to do 4 lines of code to do all of this, I would like to be able to do this. I'd like to be able to say L3 equals loan, 25,000, 6.7% interest, 5 years. And then I'd just be able to say print string L3 dot payment. Actually, I don't even want to do string. I just want to be able to do L3 dot payment. Okay. How could I modify my program so that it does that? Any ideas? Okay, somebody said combine the last 2 methods into one. Okay, possibly. All right, well, here's what I'm going to do. All right, I'm actually going to create a 4th instance variable called payment. Okay, and I'm going to initially set it to 0.0. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to set it equal to compute payment. Okay, so now that I've done that, now that I've done that, when I initially set up my loan, when it hits this constructor, it'll set the principal, it'll set the interest, it'll set the number of years, and then it'll set the payment equal to whatever this function does right here. Okay, so let's see if I've done this correctly. Okay, let me comment some of this stuff out. Oh no. All right. We got some kind of problem. It says name compute payment is not defined. Okay. So what do you think that I need to do in order to fix this? Okay. Well, I'll tell you. Somebody says add it in the init. Okay. That's a good guess, but not correct. So basically, this method compute payment, okay, is referred to the same way that all these variables are referred to. So instead of doing compute payment and passing in self, what I actually need to do is I need to do self dot compute payment. Okay. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Okay. But basically, anytime you refer to either variables or methods inside of this class, okay, you're going to do it with the self dot operator, okay? And you're probably thinking, well, that's weird because I'm not passing in any arguments to compute payment, but compute payment wants this argument self. Well, when you do self dot compute payment, it actually is implicitly doing that. So it's a little bit weird, but again, if you practice on a daily basis, it becomes very second nature after you've been doing it for a while, okay? So this is what we need to do. All right, now, do we think that this is going to solve the problems? Let's see. Okay, oh, look at that. Do you see that? Okay, it immediately, okay, payment was computed right here. It got shoved here into self.payment and it just worked. Everything worked. Printing L3.payment. Okay. So the point of this lecture was to show a couple of things. All right. It was to show that when we create methods, all right, we need to have the self argument passed in here. When we refer to all of the different variables, we do so using self dot, okay? And when we call methods inside the class, now note that I'm inside the class. Outside the class, what I was doing before, okay? I didn't have to do any of that self business because the self only refers to stuff inside the class, okay? When I'm outside the class down here, I can just do it the way that I did it initially, L1.computePayment. But now I don't even have to do that, okay? This is redundant. I don't need to compute the payment twice because the payment is automatically being computed right when I go into this constructor, okay? Right when once I've set the principal, interest, and years, it just goes ahead and computes the payment immediately, and I don't have to do any extra work. Okay, so that's what allows this nice structure down here, where I just say the loan, and then I print out the payment, just like that. Okay, now, can I modify my string function in any way that would make it nicer? Any ideas? Okay, well, how about we take the payment and stick it here inside the string function? Okay, so let's just over here at the end. All right, so now I don't even have to print out L3.payment. I can just print out L3 and I'll get all the details. Okay. So in other words, I just did L3 equals loan, and then I print out L3. Watch. Okay. See how nice that looks? I get principal 25,000, interest 6.7, years 5, payment 491.49. Okay. All in just that one, basically 2 lines of code right here. Okay. So that right there is again, it's a pretty simplistic example, but that's the power of object-oriented programming. Okay. All of these magic computations happened, and me as the user, okay, out here, I don't have to know how to actually compute a loan. Okay. If I were to download this loan class off of the internet, right, and just use it, I don't have to be concerned with the details of all this math.pow divided by 1200 business. Okay, because it's all just hidden in there. Okay, so that again, that's one of the whole points of object-oriented programming. Just like what we did in the last lecture with the Billboard music class and the Pokemon ASCII art generator. Okay, we don't have to be concerned with the details of how it was that they got those Billboard music lists. Okay, we just say, hey, I'd like a new Billboard list, print it out. Wow, look, there it is. All done. I didn't have to do any additional work. Thank you so much, programmer, for doing that for me. Same thing here with the loan class. Now that this is written for somebody else could come along and say, hey, I'd like to compute loan payments, and they don't have to even know any math to do it. They can just call this, print it out, and they're all done. Okay. All right, so that's basically what I wanted to go over today. I know we're a little bit early. It's about 7:50. So At this point, I'm going to open it up to questions.